This is part one of a two-part deep dive into one of Gordon Lightfoot's songs. The second part of this episode will be released at a later date. I hope you enjoy the conversation between me and my guest. Thank you in advance for listening.
The first guest of the evening is truly a poet. He's an artist. He is a friend and an inspiration to anyone who has ever played the guitar or tried to write poetry. Would you please welcome Gordon Lightfoot?
I came down to Albany, to New York, to find what I'd been missing. I looked across the river to the city where the windows all stood glistening. I stood listening. This is Carefree Highway Revisited, the show that celebrates Gordon Lightfoot's music song by song, with all episodes available on www.lightfootpodcast.com. I'm your host, Mike Messner, and with me today is a fellow Lightfoot fan making her second appearance on the podcast from Traverse City, Michigan, Carole Navarro. Carole, welcome back to Carefree Highway Revisited.
Hi, Mike. Thank you, and thanks for having me back.
So what's new with you? The last time we saw you was about 18 months ago, and wanted to know how you've been and what's been going on.
Well, I can't complain. I'm not a musician, so I don't have any new recordings or gigs to report, although I'm married to a musician. I did manage to travel to Scotland with Chuck Thomas, who was Gordon's stage manager. My husband and I went with Chuck and his wife, Suzette, for a 2-week tour of Scotland. And I've seen the Lightfoot Band without Gordon a couple of times.
All right. So you're keeping your feet wet in the Lightfoot canon then?
Yes, I actually came to Traverse City, so that was a real treat. I didn't have to travel for that one.
Oh, can't beat that. So you wanted to talk about Cold Hands from New York, which is a relatively early song in Lightfoot's experience. So I'm wondering, why did you want to talk about it in particular tonight?
Well, again, it's one of those obscure songs that not many people know about. And so I figured that would probably be a good choice. And I love the song. I think, and again, his earlier work is what drew me into Gordon. And so I always tend to go back to that.
That makes perfect sense. To me, it is a wonderfully Dylan-esque song. And I don't think Gordon was conscious of that when he wrote it or when he sang it. But it does remind me of Hard Rain's Gonna Fall by Dylan, but with a much nicer melody. And the lyrical focus could be almost any big city, not just New York. There was nothing in this that I saw, oh, well, this has to be about New York. I mean, the title gives it away, of course, but it wasn't anything that distinctive to that particular city. It could be any city in probably the United States or Canada. And that's why I liked it so much. Do you have any anecdotal stories about the song, or times when it was particularly apropos for you, or times when it was first meaningful, anything like that?
Well, like I said, I actually came to the song later on my Gordon Lightfoot fan travel, because it was not an album I had purchased right away. I think my first album I bought was If You Could Read My Mind. But I'd heard most of those songs on the radio station I used to listen to. But it was just one of those songs, as soon as I heard it, it's like, oh my gosh, it just kind of struck a lot of chords. It's very passionate. It's atmospheric. I think it's poetry, New York style. I imagine him sitting in some, if he didn't have the music, just saying the words in some beatnik kind of atmosphere in some smoky bar. And also, I think there's a lot of parallels to Walt Whitman's poetry in this tune. And on the back of the album, if there's a poem that Gordon actually wrote, and it's titled Please. And I think this song was actually based on the poem that he wrote. So I find it kind of interesting that the song did get a lot of play.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I didn't know that. Of course, Lightfoot was more or less a regional artist in 1968, 1969. He hadn't had the kind of breakout that Dylan had had. But it's interesting that there is that connection. So thank you for mentioning that. And I didn't know the connection with Walt Whitman at all. Very cool.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if he meant it to be that. I remember I met Nicholas Jennings at a book signing one time, and I knew he'd been to Gordon's home, and I said, "Did you happen to notice any Walt Whitman on his bookshelf?" And he said no, he hadn't, but this is one of the songs. I see a lot of Walt Whitman in Gordon's writing. So I just wonder if he was a Walt Whitman fan.
Could be. I don't really know. I've also wondered whether he was a Miguel Cervantes fan, because where did he get the inspiration to write Don Quixote? That may be a mystery we never know the answer to, but it's fun to think about, what his reading habits were. Is there a setting that is perfect for you to listen to this song, or could you absolutely listen to the song anywhere?
Well, I could listen to it anywhere, but if I was anywhere and if I was in a crowd, I would have to stop everyone from talking so I could listen to the song, because I would find it hard to believe other people aren't listening to the song as well. But mostly I would have to say when I'm feeling kind of reflective, I think when I listen to this song, it kind of brings me in touch with my own good fortune, but it also puts me in a space where I feel compassion for other people who live in environments and situations where they're kind of helpless and disenfranchised. I think he did a really great job with the lyrics in the song, kind of putting you in that place. So mostly I listen to it by myself.
Yeah, I do also. And that's because it is such a sweeping song, and it is fairly rapid fire, but it's not rapid fire in a negative way. It's just beautiful images or stark images, one right after the other. And I'm with you. I could listen to the song anywhere and I wouldn't understand why everybody else wasn't listening, which is why I would also probably listen to it by myself in whatever the setting was going to be. According to Nicholas Jennings, whom you just mentioned, the song was written in London in June of 1967. Lightfoot had traveled to England in an attempt to overcome a case of writer's block. And apparently this is the same trip where he wrote The Gypsy, which we talked about when you were on the podcast last time.
Right.
So, so we're coming full circle in terms of his trip to London. Are there any other angles that you can give on how the song got written?
Actually, I could not find anything on how the song got written. I never asked him about the song. So I can only guess that it was a successful trip to England, because I think on that album, there are a lot of some of his best songs are on there, in my opinion. But no, I couldn't really find anything, although I imagine that it's pretty clear that when he came back from England, he went to New York. And I don't know if that was his first time being in New York or not, but he was still a pretty young man. I think he would have been about 30 years old at the time when he wrote this song. So I know, like, my husband, who was a musician, said his goal was always to leave San Francisco area and go to New York and be a big time musician. So I kind of picture Gordon maybe coming into New York thinking, I'm going to hit the New York scene, or whatever musicians aspire to by going to New York. So maybe he came there with that in mind. I have no idea. I'm just guessing.
Now that you talk about it, it does kind of fit into this pantheon of songs of musicians who think they're going to make it in New York because that's the big time. I think about Jim Croce's Box Number 10 and New York's Not My Home and other things, your husband's own experience as well. But the fact that he wrote it in 67 on this trip to England makes me think that he had already been to New York and experienced it to some degree. But it did end up on Back Here on Earth, which I agree with you has some of his very best early songs. So you're right on that. Lot to take apart in the lyrics. So let's go ahead and get started. I came down through Albany to New York to find what I'd been missing. Now, that makes sense because he was in Toronto, or was headquartered, so to speak, in Toronto in those days, or around Toronto. And New York is the place to be. Was then, is now, especially for people on the Eastern Seaboard, has a great reputation for being the big time. It does make me wonder, he's missing something, and I'm wondering, does he mean he's missing something from his life, or does he feel like I've been missing out on the great experiences that New York is supposed to have? What do you think?
You're right. I think it could have been both, missing in life and also missing on what's going on musically in New York. He probably did a lot of reflection when he was over in England doing his songwriting and trying to disconnect from everything else. So he comes back to the state or to North America with kind of a sense of renewed interest in life and music. He obviously got over his writer's block with this album. So maybe he felt he was ready for the next step. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, and it did imply that he was moving to New York, not just visiting. I'll talk about that again in a little while. Into a tunnel I did rise like a grave inside, but I was young and able. I've only been to New York twice, and both times I was coming from the Jersey side. So I don't know if he was going through the Holland Tunnel or there was some other way of getting into the city. Do you know anything about the geography of that? I mean, would he have to have come through the Holland Tunnel?
I have no idea. I know there are a lot of tunnels in New York, but the way I read into a lot of his music is more of a metaphor. So going into a tunnel, maybe he went through a series of tunnels getting into New York and started to feel like maybe it felt like a tomb or a grave. And I guess all big cities have tunnels like that, but New York has its own special energy separate from the rest of the world. So going through these tunnels and coming out and seeing what's expecting, maybe he had big expectations when he emerged from the tunnel.
Yeah, it could be. But the fact that there are so many famous tunnels or prominent tunnels in New York and around New York City make me think that he wasn't just speaking metaphorically, that there was probably some actual literal tunnel that he was going into. That's my impression. When I came out the other end, through the smoke, the winter light was feeble. So he's experiencing pollution. And it's winter. And if you've ever been to New York in the winter, it is a particularly brutal time. I mean, when I was there just before the holiday season, the tears were freezing in my eyes. That's how cold it was. And if you've been there, I'm sure you've had some similar experiences.
Yeah, I think, though, coming out the other side of the tunnel and experiencing the winter, the light, maybe he was just trying to process what he was seeing. Maybe, I don't know if that's what he expected to see, but I think he was just trying to take in the whole scene of New York. I know first time I went to New York, I was stuck in traffic. And actually, I was going to a Gordon Lightfoot concert with some friends. And I had only passed through once in New York. I didn't really see the city, but we drove into New York. And again, we weren't in a tunnel, but you kind of enter New York in this kind of merging traffic where it comes to a standstill. And so I'm talking with my friends in the car and thinking, I don't really like this. I don't like being in the city. Why am I doing this? And they're telling me, just relax, enjoy it, just embrace it, embrace the energy. So we finally get into the city, and this little old lady was crossing the street. My friends start honking the horn and yelling at her, come on, hurry up, get out of the way. So that line makes me think of that particular moment with my friends. So like you enter the city and everything's so different from what you knew or what you came from. And again, he was only 30 years old. He was still pretty young, and he'd probably seen a lot already, but being a small town boy from Aurelia and then coming into this big city where, he's processing the light and trying to get a pulse on the energy of the city. That's kind of how I interpret that.
You're listening to Carefree Highway Revisited. We'll be right back after a word from a podcast partner or two.
250 and Counting is the podcast that walks you through American history one day at a time.
I'm Mike Messner.
I'm Claude Call.
Join us as we spend just a couple of minutes with you
each day,
telling you about the events that took place exactly 250 years ago on that date.
You'll learn more about the big events
and the small events
that led to American independence.
Look for 250 and Counting in your favorite podcast software.
That's 250 and Counting from Acroasis Media.
Sanjo, look!
Yes, Zach? Wait, what's that thing you're holding up?
It's a time travel device. We can use it to go back to the past and watch movies.
But we already do that on our podcast, Oldie But a Goodie.
No, On previous episodes, we were pretending to time travel. Now we can do it for real.
Cool, so we can really go back to like the 80s or the 90s?
No, Santo, you're thinking too little. I mean, we could go really far back, like we travel back over 100 years into the past.
Oh, but Zach, that's so far in the past. Those movies would be old.
Yeah, but, well, our show is called Oldie But a Goodie, so we should probably do old movies.
Oh, that's a good point.
That's right, folks. This year on Oldie But a Goodie, we're going back further than ever before.
Wait, who are you talking to?
We're starting in 1920s, doing one movie from that year, and then moving up to 1921, and we're continuing that until the year 1969.
Nice.
Join our time-traveling journey through cinema by subscribing now to Oldie But a Goodie, out wherever you get your podcasts.
That's Not Canon Productions podcast.
That brings us sort of to the next piece of the lyrics. I was optimistic, though. A cabbie told me where to go. I thanked him. And cabbies are notorious for giving people advice on that, saying, here's where you want to go, and here's the hottest ticket in town, or things like that. A face of white, a face of brown, which indicates to me he notices that. And what that tells me is probably not a whole lot of diversity in Toronto, and certainly not in Orillia in those days, because he's seeing the different skin tones. Here a smile and there a look of danger for a stranger. And this is almost the crystal of the entire song, because it's really saying that you don't trust people in the city. You know, you have to have your defenses up to some degree, or you're going to be taken advantage of. And it's true in larger senses in different places and different times for different people, but there's not an openness to fellowship that there probably would have been in Orillia or in Toronto. And then we get into the chorus. It was too unreal for me. I found no one who trusted me. There was no man could offer me a cold hand from New York. And I had a little bit of trouble with this. And then I thought, well, even a cold hand would have been welcome. Any sort of gesture to initiate fellowship or communication or some sort of contact, but he doesn't even get that. And the city's not offering any rejection, but it's certainly not offering any warmth either.
Taking those three verses into account, he comes to New York, he's ready to embrace the experience. He's young, he's able, he's excited, going to New York. So then he takes, he puts you in that, like, I'm really excited about this. And then a cabbie, kind of a classic icon of New York. So he puts you right in the city there. And then you see the diversity of New York. So he's kind of taken in all the scenery, and you can almost picture him walking through the streets of New York, kind of looking around, taking it all in, and then seeing the smile or a look of danger on the faces. People aren't really, some people might be friendly, and most people just kind of walk by you. So he's coming from Toronto, and I remember going to Toronto back in the 70s, and Toronto had the reputation of being a real friendly city, which it was. So there's a real contrast between the energy of Toronto and New York. So it's kind of like, well, I'm not going to find any friends here in New York like I could in Toronto, walking down the streets in Toronto.
You've been to Toronto. I have not. So I don't have any impressions to give one way or the other. But if it was as friendly as you're saying it was, and you contrast that with New York, which is big and loud and tough and very Darwinistic in a lot of ways. I mean, you either sink or swim, and nobody's going to give you a hand up. It makes me think of Ralph McTell's song Streets of London, Where I Have Lived. And, it has a line in it that the wind cries a little pity for one more forgotten hero and a world that doesn't care. And that was the impression that I got. There was sort of an echo there, between those two songs.
I don't know that song.
If you really want to understand where I'm coming from, you go back and, listen back to a clip of Streets of London by Ralph McTell. Cold hands from New York, a voice within you cries, won't someone please help me? I mean, some sort of human connection. And because it's clear he's not finding it in the way that he definitely found it in Orillia, because everybody knew him, or a lot of people knew him. And then in Toronto, because it was a relatively friendly or relatively warm city. So he's not going to find it. The thing that I found interesting is that he said a voice within you cries, not within me cries. So I'm wondering, why didn't he, say a voice within me cries, won't someone please help me? I don't want to psychoanalyze it too much, but any thoughts on why he used you instead of me?
Oh yeah, because again, like I said, this whole song I think elicits compassion, and so I think he may be speaking in third person or speaking for the other person. This verse is repeated 5 times in the song, and I underlined the word please because like I said, the poem on the back of this album is titled Please. And the lyrics really are they're not exactly the words from this song, but they seem to all relate to the words in this particular song. So I think that as he enters the city and starts observing, because he's the observer here, that he's seeing that people aren't helping each other. And as we go through the other lyrics, I think that maybe becomes a little clearer why he says, a voice within you cries, won't someone please help me?
Okay, I got it.
I think it's testimony to his ability to feel compassion and empathy for others, because a lot of his music is written, his protest songs and, like Circle of Steel, he kind of puts himself in the place of someone else. So he gets you to feel. I guess that's why I like the song, because it makes me feel.
Yeah, and he's in it, but he's not in it. I mean, he's witnessing it, but he's not living it. I think another thing that intrigues me about this is that the next part of the chorus says, I'll do the same for you one day if you should ever pass my way and need me. Now, that's a future promise, and it's empathetic, but he's not taking the initiative either. He's not doing anything to reach out to anyone, or if he is, it's not explicit that he's doing anything. So I'm not trying to say that he's to blame for what New York is. It's interesting that his narrator is feeling like he can't do.
I think when you're in a situation like that, though, you're so overwhelmed. You see people homeless, you see people begging, and you just kind of get drawn into it. And I kind of relate to that, traveling in Colombia and seeing the overwhelming number of Venezuelans that were on the streets in Colombia, just begging, like a pregnant woman sitting on the street in this hot baking weather with her 2-year-old son with nothing to drink. And she's sitting there begging. I mean, you just kind of feel overwhelmed and, what can you do?
Yeah, there is so much coming at him that he literally doesn't know how to process it all. So it's possible that he hadn't had the time.
Right. And I think that Gordon was kind of an introvert himself. And so when you are in a situation where there's so much visual, audio, smells, all these overstimulation of all your senses coming at you all at once can be kind of overwhelming.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. Yeah, especially for somebody who, as he said himself in the early days, he was a little naive, and Aurelia was not a huge city by any stretch of the imagination, and Toronto was certainly not as big as New York. I came down to live alone in New York, the city of the living. And I don't know what he meant by the city of the living. Do you have any thoughts on what that phrase means?
Well, I guess, again, it's a city that's alive. It has a reputation of being alive. And again, I think a lot of musicians aspire to going to make it in New York. He thought maybe he would just come by himself and see if he could make a go of it. I don't know. I'm just speculating about what his intentions were being there. But, I'm going to be in the middle of the action where all the great musicians go to play. And I think that was a big folk scene at the time in New York. So I guess he thought he would make it there.
He probably felt that if he was going to make it in the music business, it wasn't going to be in Toronto, which had great music, but not a whole lot of world famous recording studios, and didn't have the tradition from Tin Pan Alley and other areas in New York that the city did have. There were fortunes at my feet, but most the men were taking, none were giving. And it makes me think of Wall Street. I've been an advisor to a business club at school, and I do a little bit of stock trading on the side myself. And I've seen enough to know that the stock market and the business world generally are pretty unforgiving and pretty competitive. and that people are there for themselves. They're not there to build anybody else up, unless it happens to help them at the same time. Children ran and children played, and roses grew in alleyways. And I thought, does that mean window boxes outside of apartments that are facing alleys? Because it seems like an alleyway would be an unlikely place for roses to grow. Or is he speaking metaphorically here?
Comes into my mind when I read this is the roses growing out of cracks in the alley. I don't know. That's just the image it conjured up. And I love that he said children ran and children played, and there were roses in the alleys. It's the same wherever you go, because like I said, and again, I remember being in Colombia in impoverished areas that you or I probably can't picture living in. But the kids are always playing, and they don't know that they're living in disenfranchised places. But children play, and the roses, I don't know, that maybe that's just symbolic that people tried to aesthetically have a good life. You know, maybe there were some planter boxes, but he noticed them. It's just funny. Again, he's the seer, and he's trying to take in the good things that are happening, searching for the good things that are happening, maybe when he's so kind of confused about all the other disconnect of the relationships there.
Well, another thing I just thought of is that there was an old Drifters song called There Is a Rose in Spanish Harlem.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
I haven't listened to that song very carefully in a very long time, but that may have also been something he was using to finish out that particular thought.
That wraps up the first part of this episode of Carefree Highway Revisited. The second part of this discussion will be released very soon. I hope you enjoyed this conversation so far, and that you'll listen to the second part when it comes out. See you next time.